Hey gang, it's Marie here from GoalieTrainingPro.com. Welcome to Goalie Training Pro TV, episode 6. I just realized I've left my notes in the printer. I'll be right back. I'm coming. Okay, so we are doing a bottom-up sequence, right? So we started with the foot, then we talked about the ankle, then we talked about the knee last week, and so today, naturally, we're going to talk about your head and concussions, because maybe I was like sick a couple days of anatomy class, or I went out the night before and I missed it or something, but no. It's something that's been on my mind, and I didn't want to wait, because the next thing we'll talk about is the hip and the pelvis, then we'll talk about the back, then we'll talk about the shoulder and the thoracic spine, then we'll probably talk about elbows and wrists together, and I didn't want to let it go for another like 3 or 4 episodes. So it's all about concussions and about your head. I want to make it really clear that what I'm going to share with you this week in this episode isn't about my personal opinion or, these are experiences I've had. It's, I basically and I wrote an article on this, about the last consensus statement that I think was in 2013. So it's a consensus statement on concussion in sport. So again, not my personal opinion. If I'm sharing any personal opinion or stories with you, I'll kind of tell you. But otherwise, I'm just trying to kind of digest this for you, because it's a pretty long article, and it's a fairly heavy read. So I did put a link to the article, so you can go and grab a copy yourself and read it over. I think it's definitely worth it, but that's what we're going to go through. So it's from the 5th International Conference on Concussion in Sport. That conference was held in October of 2016. The findings, this consensus statement, was published in April of 2017. So, the people who put this together, they're called the Concussion in Sport Group, that was founded by the IIHF, so the International Hockey Federation, the FIFA, and the IOC. And it's got doctors from all over the world on it. Some of the ones that are sort of local to us, or that you've probably heard, like on Hockey Night in Canada reference, Dr. Karen Johnston, who's a neurosurgeon in Toronto, Winna Maywissa, who is the sort of a medical director for the NHL, Jamie Kizik out of Ottawa, who has been sport med doc for the Sens and the CFL team, and hi Jamila, hey Sound. So and then even what they're representing in this paper isn't, again, it's not their bias. It's not that they're thinking, concussion's bad or concussion doesn't exist or whatever. They're just digesting, okay, what has been done research-wise. They're digesting it, they're discussing it, and then they're compiling it to say this. So this is from science. This isn't from, bias or emotion. It's just everybody has their own beliefs on it, but they're looking at it saying, what can we say is fact, and what can we say, we don't know, we need to do some more research. So even probably some of the things I'm going to share with you today, you're going to be like, that's not true because I've had concussions and I had this different experience. Really what we're saying is there needs to be a lot more research in these areas. So they make it clear that this isn't a clinical practice guideline. It doesn't represent a standard of care. It's just a discussion and a consensus of that group. And they kind of use the term SRC, S as in Sam, RC, sport-related concussion, and to sort of differentiate it from a traumatic brain injury that might be acquired by or a concussion acquired by a motor vehicle accident or something like that. But basically they define an SRC, and I'm going to read quite a bit today because, again, I'm trying to just give you what they say, not my interpretation of it, but they define it as a traumatic brain injury induced by biomechanical forces caused by either a direct blow to the head, face, or neck, or elsewhere on the body with an impulsive force transmitted to the head. So this has been a pet peeve of mine, and I've had athletes that we train, who've been concussed, like clearly been concussed, but in some cases the family member or the coach is like, no, he couldn't have had a concussion because he hit his face. He didn't bang his head. He hit his face, so it's not a concussion. It doesn't matter. I clearly remember when Sidney Crosby got that, what I think of as the first concussion. He's probably had others, but at that Winter Classic, when he got checked and kind of spun, and, all the TV people, one of my favorites, whose name I won't say, but, he couldn't have a concussion because he didn't get hit in the head, and they showed it from different angles, and he didn't get hit in the head, so people are like, no, it's not a concussion, even though he's like, So it can be a direct or indirect blow. Typical results are rapid onset of short-lived impairment of neurological function that resolves spontaneously, but in some cases can evolve over a number of minutes or hours. So this is important too. And this is more just from other things that I've learned, but you really want to watch someone in those first few hours after they have an initial incident, because if you're seeing signs of deterioration, that the symptoms are actually getting worse over that first few hours, that is not good. So you should immediately go seek medical attention to get that looked at. Usually it'll be a transient thing. Someone might, I put the lid on pretty hard. Somebody might, feel a little woozy, wobbly, weak in the knees, but then even within, an hour or so, they're like, no, I'm feeling okay. Even sometimes within minutes, they're like, no, I feel okay now. And which makes you tempted to be like, are you sure you're okay? Oh, yeah. I was just a little woozy for a second. Okay, go back in, which is totally the wrong thing to do. But if you see those symptoms getting worse, that's like a big, big time red flag. Resolution typically follows a sequential course. However, in some cases, it can be prolonged. So, usually there's a pattern. And I think in the last consensus paper, they had a statement that most concussions resolve. The average for a concussion to resolve is 10 days. But one of the things they pointed out in this paper was that, that might be somebody who resolves in, 1 day, and somebody who resolves in 20 days. So then, most people resolve in 10 days. It's sort of, an average is a little bit hard to say. Sport-related concussion is one of the most complex injuries in sport medicine to diagnose, assess, and manage. These are doctors saying it about doctors assessing and managing it. So again, it's not for us or you as coaches or parents or strength coaches or even, the team trainer to be able to definitively assess, this is a concussion and this is what needs to be done. Even the medical professionals who specialize in sport medicine are saying this is one of the hardest things for us to diagnose and manage. So, it's really for us, it's just to, get this athlete out of harm. And the analogy I always use, it's hard because if, and of course it's always the one without the children who's saying, but I think if I had a kid who, I saw them get a knee-on-knee hit, and they went down, and they got up, and then they could kind of, walk with a limp, like, I don't want to play. It's like, no, I think you're going to have a seat, and we're going to go see the doctor. So I think that makes it much clearer, but, somehow with concussion, it's kind of like, I think because a lot of us just don't want it to be a concussion, so it's like, let's just see what happens, but that really can have some dire consequences. So the point is, it's impossible to rule out a sport-related concussion when an injury event occurs associated with a transient neurological symptom. So, if somebody, so what that means is if somebody is woozy or stands up and is a little bit dizzy, but then is like, oh, no, I'm fine. We can't rule out a concussion on the field like that. So it's like, you need to remove them from the sport. So in all cases, you need to remove them from the playing field until they're assessed by somebody with better skill. And it's not for us to grade, they were just a little staggered, it's just, no, they gotta come out. There are lots of sideline tests that are totally easily accessible. Again, I put a link for one that's the Sport Concussion Assessment Tool. They call it the SCAT, which I think is what bear poop is called. Is bear poop not called SCAT as well? But it's a little something I think I learned tree planting. But this is the 5th edition. This is the most up-to-date edition. And it's you should definitely, like if your child plays contact sports, if you're the coach, if you're on the sidelines, again, not that you're going to be the medical professional, but you should read this over because it also just has some really good information. So, again, like athletes with suspected concussion can evolve over time. It's important to consider repeat evaluations. Any athlete with suspected concussion should be removed from play. Athletes with suspected concussion should not drink alcohol or use recreational drugs. You see this sometimes in like adult league sports. My husband used to play rugby when I was in grad school. He took up rugby. So we were probably, I don't know, late 20s, early 30s, and he's like, I'm going to play rugby with the boys from university. And some of those guys they would for sure be getting concussed and then be crushing beers. Actually, too, I had a question from a goalie coach who's had a teenage athlete that had a concussion, and some of his buddies said, if you smoke pot, it makes your concussion heal. And it's like, no, no, don't do that. So, but yeah, and then too, it reminds you to don't forget, if they've had some kind of a blow that's maybe caused a transient injury to the brain, it's maybe has also done something to the C-spine, so don't forget to sort of protect the neck and make sure that that's all cleared before you start getting them up and moving around. But then it goes through, and I won't go through the whole thing, but it's total red flags: neck pain or tenderness, double vision, weakness or tingling in arms or legs, headache, seizure, loss of consciousness, deteriorating conscious state, vomiting, increasing restlessness, agitated, combative. I remember when I was the bench trainer for the women's hockey team at Western University when their first few seasons, and so I was their strength coach, but also their bench trainer. And we had a girl that she didn't even get hit very hard, just kind of hit and she fell down. But then she was kind of a high-strung girl anyway. But then when she came back to the bench, she was acting odder than normal. She almost seemed like she was drunk. You would have thought, and she wasn't, but you would have thought she been drinking here before the game. And so just chatted with her, and she was in la la cuckoo land. So, sometimes those things happen so fast you don't even realize it. But, and then observable signs. So, do they lie motionless at all? Is there balance or gait or motor coordination? You see those guys in hockey definitely that they can't even find their way to the bench. They're in such trouble. Disorientation, confusion, that blank, vacant look, any facial injury after trauma. So those are things you would observe. And then you would just ask them, where are we playing this game? What half is it now, or what period is it? Who scored last in this game? What team did we play? What was our last game against? Did we win the last game? Things like that. And then it goes on, even does the Glasgow Coma Scale, symptom, mild, medium, severe, going through all sorts of things. So you should read that over so that you kind of know what you're looking for and probably even take a copy with you. Again, I put the link down. You can just download it for free. That's a great thing, too. They make all this stuff really easily accessible because they're serious about improving it. So any symptoms count. So if it's only a headache or only a little dizzy, that counts. It's not oh, okay, well then that's probably fine. Or it's only a headache, it's not dizziness. That's probably okay. It's just any sign, because everybody's different. So any sign counts. So it could be, headache, foggy, loss of consciousness, a little amnesia, short-term memory loss, neurological deficit, balance impairment, behavioral changes, cognitive impairment, so trouble kind of thinking, sleep disturbances, drowsiness, any of that stuff. So, and then again, monitor for any deterioration in the first few hours. Then, this is the interesting part that some of you are not going to like. So, there is a graduated return to sport. And to go through it takes a week. So don't forget seeing stars. Yeah, seeing stars. Yeah. Oh, that means you just got your bell rung, Jason. You're fine. Yeah. So the return to play progression takes a week. So even if you heal as fast as you can heal, you'll be back to sport in a week. There's no 3-day fast track of the progression, which I know some of you are not going to like very much at all. But here's how it works. So the first sort of 24 to 48 hours are just rest. And yeah, try to limit your screen time, rest, probably not even school. Just make sure that you're symptom-free for that 24 hours. Then you go to stage 1, which is symptom-limited activities. So daily activities that don't provoke the symptoms. So just gradual reintroduction of work or school or screens or whatever. And as long as that doesn't provoke symptoms, you get to go to stage 2. Stage 2 is light aerobic exercise. So just walking or stationary cycling at a slow to medium pace, not jogging that's going to bounce you around, or rollerblading where you might fall and smash yourself. No resistance training where you're going to be like holding your breath and really straining. So we're just trying to increase the heart rate a little bit beyond resting level and see, does that make you feel fine or do you feel worse? Do your symptoms come back? Hi, Kevin. Do your symptoms come back? Again, you're not going to like this. If your symptoms come back, even if it's a little bit, you go back to stage 1. 24 hours of regular activity, you're symptom-free, you can try to go back to stage 2 again, which is light aerobic exercise. You can't just be like, wow, it's just a little bit, I think I'll keep going. Stage 3 is sport-specific exercise. So running or skating drills, no head impact activities, so you can't participate in practice, but you can go out and just skate or run, just to add some different sort of movement, more dynamic movement patterns. If that's fine, you go to stage 4. If that's not fine, you go back to stage 2. And then if you can do a day with light aerobic activity and it's fine, then you get to try stage 3 again. Stage 4, non-contact training drills. So harder training drills. Might be some passing drills, some shooting drills. You can start progressive resistance training. Here's where you can get back in the gym and do some progressive resistance training. So not just back to what you were doing, but a little bit lighter. So you're working some exercise, some coordination, increased thinking, because you're participating. Okay, I'm in a passing drill. Where am I supposed to go? Who am I supposed to pass to? If you can do that without any symptoms, even if they're just little bitty, then you get to go on to, you're getting the idea. You get to go on to level 5, which is full contact practice. So following medical clearance, and really all of these things you should, hopefully you're lucky enough. For us, I live in London, Ontario. Fowler Kennedy Sport Medicine Clinic does an amazing job with concussions. Hopefully you can go see somebody who specializes in it. Sometimes your family doctor, unless they take a special interest in working with athletes and especially helping athletes who've had concussion, they might not be up on this stuff because they've got so much other stuff to worry about. Like they got to make sure their patients are healthy and don't have some kind of, really bad disease. So they might not be up on this stuff. And they might be like, well, you probably just got a little ding, take a rest for a couple of days, and then you're probably good. So hi, Robert. So full contact, following medical clearance, participate in normal training activities. So again, we do this to restore your confidence, to know, yeah, I'm okay. I feel good. I feel safe. I know what's going on. Assess your functional skills by the coaching staff. So the coaching staff too can see like, yeah, he looks good. You're not sort of out there, poor skill or poor judgment, things like that. And then stage 6 would be return to game. So play a game. So you should never be playing a game until you've done a full practice, even if it's the biggest tournament of the year. And, I remember actually I did have an email from a parent once. It was their child had been concussed, and the doctor, and again, this was a little bit different too, but the doctor, I think, had told them they had to take a week off, like didn't really have a progression, but said they had to be away from sport for the week. And it was like the tournament started like tomorrow kind of thing. And the parent, was really mad, and emailed to say, and my kid was so upset and they were in tears about it. What do you think? Do you think it's okay for them to play in the tournament? It's like, number one, I'm not a doctor. Number two, no. And again, like somebody who's had a concussion isn't in their right mind, really. And they are going to be over emotional. So, again, just because they're crying, if the kid couldn't walk on their knee, you wouldn't be like, yeah, I think you should go try and see how it goes. So that's your return to play criteria. So that takes a week to follow each of those steps. And again, it has to be symptom free, or else you go back. Oh, and then there's a return to school progression too. Where is that? There. So the return to school progression is, again, maybe 24 hours off just for rest. Then daily activities at home that don't give symptoms. So typical activities your kid would do as long as they don't increase symptoms. So some reading, even screen time, starting with 5 to 15 minutes at a time and then building up. So just gradual return to typical kid activities, doing the Twitter or whatever. Then level 2, if that's good, you go to level 2, which is school activities, which would be homework, reading, other cognitive activities, but outside the classroom. So just, getting them thinking, using their brain, doing their homework. Then the next one would be returning to school part-time. So back to reintroduction of schoolwork, but maybe like a half day or like, first period, third period, fifth period, or something like that. Again, just to then be around lots of people and doing the schoolwork. And then the last, if that's fine, then back to school full time. I know, crazy, eh? So then a couple of current things. So currently they're working on some advanced neuroimaging. They're working on fluid biomarkers and genetic testing to assess if there's been a concussion. So even like I could do a blood test and see if there are these biomarkers in my blood that suggest that I actually had a concussion. And also that might suggest the degree or the length of recovery. They've been looking even at genetic predisposition. Are there some things that genetically predispose you to getting concussion or to having more severe concussion symptoms? Those are all in their infancy. So there isn't such a thing, but those are some of the things they're working on to try and help. It's cool because a lot of really smart people are working on this. Beyond the rest for the acute phase of 28 to 48 hours, is warranted as long as gradual return to activity doesn't trigger any symptoms. So that is to say, beyond the first 24 to 48 hours, that absolute rest isn't warranted unless we start to reintroduce activity and our symptoms come back, and then we have to step back. They also talked about, don't forget, rehabbing other injuries. So, if I've taken a significant blow that's given me a concussion, maybe I've also done some, jarred my neck or my shoulder that actually needs rehabilitation too. So we want to look after those things as well. So then we're not just stepping back on the sporting field or on the ice, ready to go, but we still have, our shoulder isn't working right or our alignment is out. So don't forget about rehabbing and assessing those other injuries, but that also has to stay below threshold. So you need to be working with a therapist who sort of understands, the concussion protocol and is going to help you do that without bringing on your symptoms. The expected time frames of recovery, 10 to 14 days in adults and somewhere under 4 weeks for children. So children take longer. Prolonged symptoms for an adult would be lasting more than 10 to 14 days. Prolonged symptoms for a child would be lasting more than a month or 4 weeks, which I was actually surprised by that too. I thought, wow, that's a long time. If the symptoms persist, individualized treatment plan should include symptom-limited aerobic exercise. So this is my symptoms are persisting beyond the expected recovery time. So we're going to do some specific programmed aerobic activity with you, even though there are still some intermittent symptoms, but that don't increase the symptoms. But again, guided by professionals and experts in the area. Some cognitive and behavioral therapy, and then any physical therapy to address other injuries. This cognitive and behavioral therapy is really important, and I think it gets missed a lot. And I've seen it in hi Grant, I've seen it in other athletes that I train who played sports where they kind of are getting chronically hit, and some hockey players who've played long careers. And you can see those guys that have had chronic concussion issues, you can see their personality does change over time. And I don't know why exactly that is, if it's a structural change or just, I don't know why, but you see that. And I've talked to, or I've heard presentations by sport med doctors who, work with, specialize in working with athletes who've had concussions, and they'll often try, so if you're a parent, they kind of do this on purpose, but they'll often try to get mom or dad out of the room so that they can have a really frank discussion with the athlete, especially like a teenage athlete, because sometimes athletes are hesitant to say things in front of their mom or their dad. But where like before the injury, this kid's happy-go-lucky, no problems, and then when they get a chance to talk to the doctor just in private, this kid is like breaking down in tears and is suffering with depression and having thoughts of suicide and things like that. So it's very scary, and we all think, oh, that wouldn't happen to my kid. But again, it's something's going on with the brain, and the body's trying to respond to it. But those things can happen. So don't kind of neglect or think like, well, they're just kind of blue because they can't play hockey for a while. It can be more than that. It's not, I'm not trying to scare you that it's, oh my gosh, it's every kid has those thoughts, but it can happen. And then they talked a little bit about like pharmacotherapy, or like taking meds to help with your symptoms. And it sounded like that can sort of help with symptoms at times, but the bottom line was that you shouldn't be returning to play if you're taking medicines to help control your symptoms. Risk factors for sport-related concussion is, surprise, surprise, past sport-related concussion. Multiple past sport-related concussions are associated with more symptoms. So if you've had ones before, you're probably going to have more symptoms with subsequent ones. The single biggest predictor of slower recovery is the severity of a person's initial symptoms in the first day or initial few days. So the worse it is in the first day, it's probably going to be longer recovery. Individuals with pre-existing mental health or history of migraine headaches may be more prone to have prolonged symptoms. So again, that wasn't really, we did a research study and there was statistically significant, but it was just like, there's enough there to make us think that maybe that will prolong symptoms. Those with ADHD and other learning disabilities might require more attention and planning during the return to school phase, but don't seem to be at increased risk of prolonged symptoms. So it's more just, already being in that environment is a challenge, so you might take a little bit more planning or a little more gradual transition back. Greater risk for girls than boys for having prolonged symptoms as a teenager, which I thought was interesting, and they didn't say why, but it was just like, that's interesting. And then they talked about sort of a problem because an athlete may show as clinically recovered. So, I'm not having any symptoms, I can lift weights, I can do full practice, I'm good. But they don't know that means that they're physiologically recovered, so that, whatever actually did happen in their brain, that's repaired and that they're fine. So I thought of it almost as like if I had, had turf burn or something like that, and I had a scab there, like I'm fine, like it feels fine and I can play, but I'm vulnerable, if I get hit there again, I'm vulnerable to open up that injury. So I thought that was kind of an interesting point. They said management to be same for elite or non-elite athletes. I think if you watch any NHL games, I'm suspicious. You see a guy that's like, oh, he's going to the quiet room. Oh, he's back on the bench. He must have been fine. It's like, what? But they're saying, there should be no, which makes sense. There's no difference. So then they talk about the chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the CTE, which some of the high-profile hockey players who have unfortunately passed away, they've donated their brains to research this, and they look and they see that they have this CTE. but there hasn't been a cause and effect relationship, hasn't been established yet between CTE and sport-related concussions. But again, that doesn't mean there isn't one. It just means there isn't enough scientific research. There's anecdotal research, but again, this is coming from science, not from common sense or what we think. It's like, but there hasn't been enough scientific research to make that connection. So it doesn't mean there isn't one. It's just there isn't one yet. So then they were looking at helmets, and they said that it's really hard. It's hard to sort of, so like in hockey and football and things like that, we usually say helmets prevent skull fractures and lacerations. They don't prevent concussions. And it's hard to say whether they reduce the risk of concussion or not, because everybody wears one. It's not like you have somebody who's out playing football or hockey that doesn't wear a helmet. And so you can say, oh yeah, of the guys that don't wear helmets, they're 90% more likely to get a concussion. Everybody's wearing a helmet, so it's a bit of a moot point. They looked at downhill skiing, where some people do and some people don't, and they said, yeah, there's probably enough evidence there to say that, yes, wearing a helmet when you ski is warranted, that should be mandatory. Then they did a meta-analysis of mouth guards. So a meta-analysis is you go back and look at research that all these other people have done, and you sort of, not steal, but you take all the data and then you put it together as if it's one data set, as if it's sort of one research project, and then you run that through a statistical analysis and see if there's a statistical significance. Because sometimes there's not statistical significance because, you know, my sample size was just too small or something like that. So then when they run all that through, they say that there is a non-significant trend to support the use of mouth guards. So that means that it's not statistically significant. But when you if you looked at sort of a trend of the raw data, it's, you know, if it's like this is greater risk of concussion, and actually I'll do it the other way. So this is greater risk of concussion, and this is lesser risk of concussion. That, you know, yeah, it kind of looks like if you're wearing a mouth guard, there's a little slighter risk. So, and that too was kind of new because, yeah, what I had learned is, you know, mouth guards protect your chiclets, and that's about it. But they're like, yeah, maybe there's a trend to suggest that it might a little bit help. So. Does it? Yeah, it's not going to prevent them, but they said the strongest and most consistent evidence for reducing the risk of concussion in hockey was taking out body checking under the age of 13. That had a protective effect. So really there isn't any equipment that is like proven to have a protective effect. Even some of the some of the programs trying, you know, good sportsmanship and things like that, they don't work. Taking checking out under the age of 13 does reduce the risk of concussion. Then, you know, it opens another can of worms, but it does reduce the risk of concussion. I've shared this before, but I'll show you. We've just started using this. We piloted it 2 summers ago, but it's called the Top Spin 360, and I am on the advisory board, but I don't get money from them. So just so you know, just being transparent. But so it looks crazy, but you put it on, and the strap's really hard to get done up, and you and then you're gonna spin the little whirly bird. Right down, make your straps easier. So then you're gonna spin it. And it takes, everybody's doing it. But it's actually really hard, and it takes a lot of coordination of your neck, which we don't really have that much of. But it comes with an app so that you know we're getting how many reps, and it measures your velocity and all that stuff. But what we're trying to do is make your neck stronger, but really mostly make it smarter so that you really know how to control your head in space. Because the idea is that if I can take a hit and instead of going like that, you know, I can just go like that, there's going to be a lot less sloshing of my brain inside my cranium, and that's going to cause less damage. So that is the philosophy, the hypothesis behind it. And there's some really interesting video. Now, again, it's hard because it's comparing a high school athlete to a university football player, but, you know, the high school quarterback gets tackled and he comes back and he smashes his head, you know, off the turf. And the university player who trains using this, he gets tackled in a very similar way, and probably by a guy that weighs maybe 100 pounds more than the other guy. And he comes and he gets knocked back, but he can stop his head and it never even touches the turf. So, you know, it's pretty compelling. It's compelling enough that we started using it in here, and, you know, as something that we can do to hopefully reduce the risk or the magnitude of concussions in the future. So more research is going on with that, but that's what we've been doing here at RevCon to work on it. So that's a wrap, gang. We'll be back next week. We'll get back on our regular routine. So we'll be up in the hip and the pelvis. That'll be a barn burner. There'll be tons on that. I think that's all I've got for you. If you haven't checked it out, actually, I'm going to post the full video on this page probably later today. But if you didn't catch it, go on my Instagram page, Goalie Training, and check out talking about hand-eye training with a bare hand and why I think I had an epiphany this week. And I think it is actually, people get mad when I say it. Some people already got mad, but I think it's worse for you in terms of your glove hand. So check out that little clip. It's on Goalie Training on my Instagram page, and I explain it, and I'll post it up here later on today when I get a chance. But that's a scoop. Thanks for tuning in. Episode number 6, Goalie Training Pro TV. This is Maria from Goalie Training Pro. If you like this, give me a thumbs up, give me a like, give me a happy face, give me a ha 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 face. That would be great. Share it, whatever you do. Bye.